This book, which I bought from the now closed Book Barn in Wells, Somerset, is the story of a very successful water finder in the latter half of the 19th century. It begins with a 4-page list of patronage of the following noblemen and gentlemen, as well as Queen Victoria's government, then outlines John Mullins's career. One of the most famous British water diviners, he was born at Colerne, near Chippenham, Wiltshire, on November the 12th, 1838, into a family of 11 children. His father was a stonemason, and Mullins followed the same trade. At the age of 21, he was employed by Sir John Orred in the building of Ashwick Hall in Gloucestershire. In the late 18th century, a house was built on this site, and the property passed by marriage to the Horlock family. In 1849 they sold it to John Cavendish Orred of Liverpool. He demolished the 18th century house and in 1857 to 1860 built the current house. A dowser water diviner was employed to locate a needed water supply. He successfully found a spring. Sir John then asked all his family and employees to try the rod. Various people present tried their hand with it, including Orred's daughter, who was frightened when the rod suddenly turned over violently. An abundant water supply was found at the spot. When Mullins tried, the rod moved so violently it snapped in two. Thereafter Mullins was considered a dowser, although he continued in his trade as a mason. He claimed to always be able to find water, if any were present. The rest of the book consists of accounts of satisfied customers. Although the book is almost entirely about water finding, it does mention that in Cornwall and California it's used for finding metallic ore, and in Pennsylvania to find mineral oil. One of John Mullins's customers was Lord Heytesbury of Warminster, Wiltshire. The owner of this invigorating tract on Salisbury Plain attached importance to the wisdom of sinking wells and conserving water, if it existed, on his estate. Mr. Mullins soon began operations by holding the rod before him as he walked along in the direction which his lordship's steward had indicated as being the most convenient places upon the plain for possessing water. Stopping suddenly, and with evident delight, not long after he'd started, "Here is a spring," he said. Those who looked by witnessed the undoubted gyrations of the twig within his hands. Within 3 hours he had located 11 springs, had volunteered the depths at which he affirmed water could be found, and had given the approximate capacity of each spring. Mr. Mullins, when questioned, showed himself to be the possessor of an excellent memory, for in harking back he could again and again correctly recapitulate what he had foretold of the value of each spring. No depth was fixed at less than 100 feet, and the majority at 150. While the best spot in the centre of the property was estimated to yield from 300 to 500 gallons per hour at 200 feet. Later Lord Heytesbury decided to sink a well at one of the spots marked by Mr. Mullins, where he said water would be found at a depth of 200 feet, and a well having been sunk through a chalk formation to a depth of 190 feet, an exceptionally fine spring was tapped, which now supplies the farms and village of Heytesbury, the water being raised by one of J.W. Titt's famous windmill pumps. His eldest son Joseph tried the twig hundreds of times before he was 19 years old, but found he only possessed the power very slightly. Therefore, thinking it would be of no use, he gave it up, till 3 years later, when he went to Ireland with his father, and was a fortnight in Ireland before he tried the twig again. This occurred at Black Rock, the last engagement his father had in Ireland on that occasion. After some experiments had been made, he accidentally took hold of one of the twigs and tried it over one of the springs that his father had just found. To his surprise, the twig began to move fast. On informing the gentleman it was the first time the twig had moved with him, he decided to test him. His plan was for his father to go and find 2 springs, make 2 private marks, and then for his son to follow him to see if he could discover the same springs. This course was pursued without Mr. Mullins's son being acquainted with the places that had been marked. When he'd gone a few yards in the direction he was told, the rod suddenly turned upwards, and the gentleman informed him that it was the exact spot where his father had stopped. He continued to advance, and stopped a second time at the other place that had been marked, so the gentleman thought it was a good test of his powers as a water-finder. From that time until now, Joseph Mullins has been declared a water-finder, and has found for gentlemen by whom he has been employed several good springs of water. H.W. Mullins, the junior member of the firm, from a lad manifested the power of using the twig, and from time to time he was successful in locating springs which Mr. Mullins senior had already discovered, and on attaining the age of 21 years he became a member of the firm. For several years he was constantly employed in the work, thus gaining considerable experience.